Welcome back to Master Data Management 1. In the previous video, you learned about the initial load mode and how it can be used to help insert new sources and their corresponding data into an MDM solution. At this point, the MDM piece is ready to start accepting data from the MySQL source. Now all we need to do is set up the AtomSphere process that will communicate with the MySQL database and query it for existing records. In the upcoming videos, you will learn how to connect the AtomSphere process to your MDM repository, which will allow you to finally move data from the MySQL database into the contact repository, resulting in the creation of your first golden record. Let's start with learning about the third step in the MDM lifecycle, which is synchronize. If you remember from our MDM lifecycle review earlier, the third step is synchronize. So what does this mean? It means we're going to leverage the AtomSphere platform to synchronize the data flow between the AtomSphere and MDM platforms. By now, you should have a firm understanding of how AtomSphere can connect to different sources such as databases, FTPs, SQL servers, and many more. You should also know how to pull documents into an AtomSphere process, as well as send data from an AtomSphere process to target source systems. Keeping this in mind, we will create a process that will pull data from our target source systems, and it will also insert that data into our contact repository located on the MDM platform. Essentially, we are synchronizing the AtomSphere and MDM platforms to work together in step 3 of the MDM lifecycle. Let's take a quick look at the overall structure of the MDM solution that we'll be creating. This is going to be a high-level overview of how AtomSphere communicates with the MDM platform. We start with the Dell Boomi MDM cloud, represented by the image of a blue cloud. Within this cloud, all repositories exist, including the contact repository we created in an earlier video. You can see that we have represented that repository with the purple rectangle under the Dell Boomi MDM cloud icon. We know that we have a set of sources with all of the data that we want to send to the contact repository, but the question is, how do we get it there? Well, we have already created a set of sources within our MDM repository. We have MySQL and SFDC. You can note these by the colored boxes within our diagram. These represent the sources that we created within the MDM platform earlier, and these are the source objects we will be referencing in order to connect our AtomSphere processes to the correct repository. We will reference these sources within the MDM API connector shapes so that data coming from our Salesforce source will be sent through the SFDC channel to our contact repository, and our MySQL data will be sent through the MySQL channel into the contact repository as well. We can do this by leveraging our AtomSphere processes, noted by the blue lines connecting the sources to the MDM source objects. One nice thing about this architecture is that if you want to add a new source, such as NetSuite, you do not need to change any of our previously created processes to include it. You simply need to add a new MDM source object within your MDM repository, and set up your AtomSphere process to pull data from NetSuite and push it through the NetSuite channel into your contact repository. We are nearly ready to begin building these processes in AtomSphere, but before we do, let's take a moment to review some of the things you learned in Boomi Essentials that will help you in this course. Let's start with the connector shape. This should be a review, but a connector is the main component containing all of the information needed to connect to a data source or application. The connector is made up of two components. The first is the connection component, which represents the physical connection information, or the where. The second is the operation, which represents the function to call or files to act upon, or in other words, this is the how. We will be using several different types of connector shapes in the upcoming exercises. We will use one to connect to each of our sources, Salesforce and MySQL database, and we have a special branded MDM connector that harnesses MDM's API that we will use to get data into our MDM platform. The connector is not the only thing that we need to do a quick review on. We actually want to talk about what a profile is. So once again, this should be review for most of you, but it's important that you understand what a profile is before we go any further. So a profile describes the layout or format of various documents read into or sent out of AtomSphere. To describe a flat file, for example, the profile contains field names, delimiters or column positions, data types, min-max lengths, and things like that. It's important to understand that a profile is not actually a shape, but it is going to be a component that some shapes use. The structure of each profile consists of data elements of a specific document type. In the example shown to the right is an XML profile. Profiles are used in maps, and to map an XML document to a flat file, set up one profile that matches the layout of the XML file, and another profile that matches the flat file. You can also use profiles whenever the document data must be inspected. Individual profile elements are commonly referenced as parameters for the decision, cleanse, program command, message, route, document properties, and exception steps. So now that we've discussed the overall architecture of our MDM solution and reviewed a couple of the key concepts, it's time to hop back into a couple exercises. I will demonstrate exercise 11 and 12, where I will configure the MySQL start shape and configure the MDM connection in operation for that process. Feel free to follow along during my demonstration, and you'll have plenty of time to try it out on your own once the video is over. Now, earlier in class, you downloaded two processes, MySQL to MDM and SFDC to MDM. The SFDC operation has been configured, so now it's time to configure the MySQL operation to get you one step closer to initiating the initial load of data into your MDM solution. So the first thing that we need to do is navigate back to the Atomsphere platform. Now, there are two ways to do this. The first way is if you go to the upper right-hand corner of the screen, you'll notice that there's this white bar that says MDM. If you hover your cursor over that, you can then click on the Atomsphere selection from the drop-down list there, and that will bring you back to the Atomsphere platform. However, earlier in one of the videos, I mentioned that you can actually open up both of the platforms, one in each of the tabs that you can have. And in this case, instead of having to click on the Atomsphere and letting it load up, you can actually just click on your own tab that you have saved from before. So we can see here up in the left-hand corner, I can go ahead and click on that tab, and now I'm back in the Atomsphere platform without having to let it load up. These platforms do load data in real time, so as you would change something, it would change it from one to the other. So let's just say you send data from your Atomsphere platform into your MDM platform. Both of the tabs would actually update in real time so that you wouldn't have to worry about loading them back up each time. So from here, we actually need to find the MySQL to MDM process. So you can go ahead into the Master Data Management 1 folder that we created earlier. You can then click on Processes. And within the Processes area, you can find MySQL to MDM and double-click that to open it up. You may get this bar at the top that says this component is open in read-only mode. If that's the case, you can go ahead and click on the Lock and Edit button down here in the lower left-hand side of the process canvas. That will then lock your user to it and allow you to work on this. For our class's purposes, it's not a big deal, but just make sure you have that clicked before you make any changes. Once you've opened the MySQL to MDM process, you can go ahead and click on the Configure button in order to access the operation, or in this case, create a new operation for this particular connection. In order to create a new operation, simply click on the green plus sign on the right side of the operation field. This is going to open up a new component, which will allow you to create this new operation. As always, the first thing that we want to do is edit the title of our new component, which we want to name this Contact Get. Now, one of the main things that you need to do with an operation is to set up the profile for that particular connection. So what we need to do is create a new profile for our Contact Get operation. And to do that, we simply click on the plus sign on the right side of our profile field. This is going to open up a brand new profile. And once again, the first thing we need to do is to give it a proper name. We're actually going to rename this the MySQL database profile. And from here, what we want to do is click on the statement option. Now, you always have the option of adding in your own SQL script. So if you are familiar with the database that you're connecting to, you can always type in your own SQL script there. But what we're actually going to do is click on the import button over here on the top right hand side of the screen. This is actually going to open up a wizard that will allow us to import the different tables and their columns based off of what it finds with the connection that we have set up. I'm actually going to start by choosing the type of atom that we're going to use. So in this case, I'm going to click in the Browse In area. This brings up a drop down, and we can see that it's pretty easy for me. I only have the Test Atom Cloud to choose from, so I'll go ahead and click on the Test Atom Cloud. And then as for the connection, we've already set up the connection for you so that you can access our database. And this is already pre-set up with all of the username and passwords and everything we need for it. So if you go ahead and click on the Choose area within the Connection field, you can then either open up the Connections area, which we have one selection, which is BOOMI MDM Training MySQL. But let's just say you had some more, you can always type it in here. You could type in BOOMI MDM and it would filter out all of the different connections until you got to the one that you want. So then from here you can simply click on the BOOMI MDM Training MySQL Connection component. And now it's going to use both of these, the atom and the connection, in order to access the database and pull back the different tables that exist. This should only take a couple seconds. Usually it doesn't take too long. So if it is taking a long time and you're getting impatient, you can always try canceling it and retrying it. But in my experience, it usually will resolve itself after just a couple moments. Now, this is typically where you would see a list of all of the tables that you have access to with this atom and connection combination that you have set up. In this case, there is a single table for us to interact with, which is contact. So you can simply click on the checkbox next to the contact table. And then you can click Next. What it's going to do is access that table and then pull back all of the columns that exist within the MySQL database for that table. Now you can see we have several different fields, I guess you can call them, or you can call them columns, whatever you prefer, to choose from. And we actually don't want to choose all of them because in our case, we may not share all of this information between all of our different sources for our company. So what we want to do is only pick out the ones that we actually need to share between different sources. This will cut down on the amount of columns within your golden record, which will ultimately make them a lot easier to work with and a lot more accurate. So in this case, we're going to choose the contact ID field. We will choose the email field. We will choose the first name, last name, and mailing address 1 fields. And then finally, the phone number field. Once you've selected each of those, you can then click on the Next button. And you should see a success screen here where it says you successfully imported the fields into your profile. Once you're done, you can go ahead and click Finish. And now we can see it filled in the SQL script for us so that we didn't have to write it out on our own. And remember, once again, if you are familiar with SQL script, you can always write this up yourself, which can be helpful, especially if you already know the database itself and don't want to go through all those steps. But my recommendation is always using the import, since there won't ever be any syntax errors or anything like that that will hold you up and slow you down. Now, if you'd like to see and verify that all the fields are there, you can always click on this plus sign next to the fields data element, which will then open up all of the different fields available within this profile. And once you're done looking at everything, you can go ahead and click on the Save and Close button here at the bottom of the screen, which will bring us back to our operation. And then from here, we can simply click Save and Close once again, so that we can come back to our Start Shape screen. Once we verify that our operation has been set in there, you can go ahead and click OK, and then save this to your process canvas. And that is exercise number 11. So this is going to bring us to exercise number 12, where we get to start configuring our MDM connector shape. So what we're going to do first is actually go to the connection shapes right here. We can go ahead and click on that. It will open up a list of all of our connection shapes, and you can simply click in the search area and type in MDM, And we only have one MDM shape, so we're going to go ahead and drag that on to our process canvas. Now the first thing we need to do is to set up the proper action. So by default it actually sets it to delete, but if you click on this we can actually set this to either delete, get, query, or upsert. Now in this case we actually want to set it to upsert so that we can either send creates or updates to current golden records. So we'll go ahead and click on upsert. Now, because this is our first connection that we're setting up for our MDM connector shape, we do need to create a new one. And this one we actually didn't create for you. The main reason is because we cannot create a new connection for you specifically, because what we're actually going to be doing is connecting to your particular MDM account. So, and specifically the repository. So we need to actually pull some information from that repository in order to connect to that account. So what we're going to do is start by clicking on the green button over here, the plus create, whatever you want to call it, connection button here to create a new connection. The first thing we'll do is rename this. It's going to be MDM Training. And then for the URL, we're actually going to type in https://mdm.boomi.com/mdm. Now this is going to be the URL that you'll use for the majority of the time. There may be some other URLs that you may put in there at some point, but for our use case here, we can simply just use this basic URL here. And then for our username and token, we actually have to go back into the MDM platform to retrieve those. So what you can do is actually click on the other tab that you should have open. This is another reason why it's really important, or not important, but recommended that you open up two different tabs so that you can simply click back and forth between your MDM platform and your Atmosphere platform. What we're going to do is navigate back to the MDM platform by clicking on the Open tab here. And then we need to go back into your repository. So what you can do is, if you're already within this screen here, you can click on the Contact Repository off to the left-hand side. But in case you're on a different screen, in order to get here, you can click on the Repositories tab, then click on your Contact Repository, and then it will bring you to the same place. From here, you can then click on the Configure sub-tab located in the upper middle part of your screen. And then here you'll have two different values noted, your username and your authentication token. So these two things are used in order to identify your particular repository. So they should typically be kept safe so that you don't give them to anyone, because anyone who has these would be able to actually alter your repository. And considering that we are trying to preserve our data and protect it, that could cause some issues. So what we'll do is go ahead and click on the Copy to Clipboard button, which is on the right side of the field for each of these. So I'll start with my username. I'll go ahead and click that for my username. Once it's copied successfully, you'll notice that there is a green checkbox that opens up, and then it will allow you to go back to your Atmosphere platform, click on the username, and go ahead and paste that in. Then for the authentication token, you can go ahead and do the same, where you can copy that to clipboard by clicking on this little icon of two sheets of paper. And then you can go back to your Atmosphere platform, click the button to click to set your token, and then you can paste your token into the password area. Simply click Apply. And now you can see, since it's set, it is now encrypted. And that's all you need to do. Simply click on Save and Close to get back to your MDM window so that we can move on to the next step. Next, we are going to need to configure the MDM connector operation. We're going to go ahead and click on the green plus sign in the operation field to create a new operation. As always, the first thing that I'm going to do is rename this operation. So I'm going to give it the name MySQL Contact Upsert. And then I'm going to click on the blue import button. This is going to bring up the MDM import wizard. And once again, we'll just need to put in the connection and the source name in order to get this going. So what we'll do is go ahead and click on the actual search icon here. It's going to bring up all of the different connections we have available. And luckily, we have our MDM training connection. So we'll go ahead and click on that. And then for our source, we'll type in MySQL. Now, keep in mind, this source does need to match exactly to the source that you have in your MDM platform. So if you have it in all capitals or all lowercase, make sure that it matches what you have. I'm just using the MySQL just like this because I know this is how I have it in my MDM platform. So once you have that all together, you can then go ahead and click Next. Now what it's going to do is use that atom to connect to your repository and double check that the MySQL source is active and ready to go. It's attached to your contact model, which is in your contact repository. As we can see here, it did pick up on that, and it can see that we have our contact repository here. If there were other repositories that you have the same model and the same source in, or actually I believe it's just the same source as long as it's attached to a model within a repository, it would show you all the different repositories that you could select from. In this case, we have a single repository and a single source that we're looking for, so we only have the object type of contact. Once you're done with that, you can go ahead and click on the Next button, which will then go ahead and load in to make sure that you are connected and are ready to go with this upsert profile. We can then go ahead and click on the Finish button once you get to this screen, which will then allow us to double check that our request profile and our source is in there properly. As long as you have the MDM contact upsert request and the MySQL source listed here in the correct casing and all of that, you can go ahead and click on the Save and Close button. And then finally, you can click on the OK button to come back to our process canvas, and then just save your work so that it doesn't disappear on you. All right, and that is the end of exercise number 12. So now it's going to be your turn to go ahead and try your own hand at exercise 11 and 12. And once you've completed these two exercises, please feel free to start the next video.